OTF, 300, bitch, let's check the stats. Niggas say they hit the goals. I bet he catching back. I know they
Somebody inside OTF received King Von's last phone call before he walked into that Atlanta parking lot on November 6, 2020. And that person has not said a single word about it in over 5 years. Not one word. Think about what that means for a second. In a world where everybody who ever shook Von's hand has given an interview, posted a tribute, dropped a song in his name, or used his memory to build their own platform, there is one specific person, someone close enough to Von that he chose to call them in what turned out to be the final minutes of his life, who has gone completely, deliberately, and suspiciously silent. And that person, according to sources close to the situation, is still inside OTF right now. Still collecting. Still moving. Still showing up to events and nodding their head when Von's name gets mentioned like they do not carry the weight of what was said on that call. So ask yourself this. Why would someone who genuinely loved Von stay quiet about the last conversation they ever had with him? What is in that phone call that is so dangerous, so complicated, or so damaging that 5 years of loyalty to a dead man's memory was not enough to make them speak? And who exactly benefits from that specific silence being maintained inside OTF while everyone else performs their grief publicly for millions of followers? Because here is what sources close to the situation are now allegedly saying, and this is the detail that changes everything. That phone call was not just a goodbye. According to insiders, Von allegedly said something during that call that the person on the other end has been protecting ever since. Not to honor Von, but to protect themselves. You cannot leave right now. Because the name of that person and what Von allegedly told them is exactly where this video is going. Davon Daquan Bennett was born on August 9, 1994, in the Parkway Gardens housing projects on the south side of Chicago, Illinois, in a neighborhood so consumed by violence that it had earned a name that carried its own eulogy before Von ever put it in a song. O Block was not a backdrop. It was a living, breathing environment that shaped everything Von became. The way he moved, the way he thought, the way he trusted people, and critically, the way he understood loyalty as something that had to be earned through proximity and proven through silence when silence was required. By the time Von signed to only the Family and Empire distribution in 2018, he had already survived things that most people only hear about in documentaries, and the music he made reflected that survival with a specificity and emotional clarity that separated him from almost every other voice in his generation. What the world knows about the night of November 6, 2020, is this. King Von and members of his team were at the Monaco Hookah Lounge in Atlanta, Georgia. An altercation broke out in the parking lot involving Von's group and the group of Quando Rondo, a rapper signed to NBA YoungBoy's Never Broke Again label. Gunfire erupted. King Von was shot multiple times and was transported to a nearby hospital where he was pronounced dead in the early hours of November 6. He was 26 years old. 3 other people were also shot during the incident. Timothy Leaks, known as Lil Tim, was later charged with Von's murder, and the legal proceedings that followed became one of the most discussed and debated cases in recent hip-hop history. Those are the facts that everyone knows. Those are the facts that have been reported, documented, and repeated thousands of times across every platform that exists. But here is where it gets interesting. Because what has never been fully examined, what sources close to the situation allege has been deliberately kept out of the public conversation, is the activity on Von's phone in the hour before that shooting began. Not during. Not after. Before. According to insiders with knowledge of the events of that evening, Von was on his phone in the time leading up to the altercation in a way that sources describe as deliberate and specific, making contact with people in his circle in a manner that suggests he was either processing something he had already encountered or communicating something about the situation as it was developing around him. And among those contacts, according to sources, was one call that stands apart from the others. One call that was longer, more direct, and allegedly more significant than anything else Von did with his phone that night. Sources close to the situation allege that this call lasted several minutes. Not a quick check-in. Not a location drop. A real conversation, the kind that sources describe as the type Von had when something was genuinely on his mind and he needed to talk it through with someone he actually trusted. And the person he called, according to these sources, was not Lil Durk. It was not a member of his management team. It was not anyone whose name has ever surfaced publicly in connection with the events of that night. It was allegedly someone who has been inside OTF's orbit continuously since before Vaughn died and who remains there today. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because the question of who Vaughn called is not just an emotional question about final moments and last words. It is allegedly a question with real implications for understanding what Vaughn knew, what he was feeling, and whether anyone in his circle had information that night that could have changed the outcome of what happened in that parking lot. Sources familiar with the situation allege that the person who received that call has never been formally interviewed about its contents, has never voluntarily offered any information about what was discussed, and has allegedly actively avoided any conversation that comes close to the subject in the years since Vaughn's death. Stay right here because it gets worse. According to insiders who claim to have spoken with people present in Atlanta that night, the general atmosphere in the hours before the shooting was not relaxed. Sources describe a level of tension that allegedly existed before Vaughn's group and Quando Rondo's group ever came into proximity with each other, a tension that sources claim was connected to ongoing street dynamics between Chicago and certain affiliated camps that had been building for months before November 2020. Vaughn was allegedly aware of this tension. He was not walking into that night blind, according to sources, and the calls he made in the hour before the shooting are allegedly consistent with someone who was processing a situation with real stakes rather than simply enjoying a night out in Atlanta. One source, speaking on condition of strict anonymity, allegedly described the mood that night by saying, and these are words relayed through sources and not confirmed firsthand, that Vaughn knew something was off before anything happened and that the people with him allegedly knew it too, but nobody wanted to be the one to say pull back. That alleged characterization, if accurate, raises a question that sources say has been sitting inside OTF for 5 years without a clean answer. If multiple people in Vaughn's circle sensed that the night was dangerous, why did the conversation that could have redirected everything allegedly stay between Vaughn and one specific person rather than becoming a group decision? Now here is the twist. Sources allege that the person Vaughn called that night was not someone with authority to make tactical decisions about Vaughn's movements. They were not security. They were not management in any formal sense. According to insiders, this person occupied a role in Vaughn's life that was closer to confidant than logistics, someone Vaughn allegedly trusted with a kind of thinking-out-loud honesty that he reserved for very few people. And that detail, according to sources, is precisely why the silence from this person is so loud. Because a confidant does not forget what was said in the last real conversation they ever had with someone they loved. A confidant carries that conversation. And sources allege that this particular confidant has been carrying it in a way that has shaped their behavior inside OTF ever since, in ways that people close to the situation claim are visible to anyone paying careful enough attention. Here is what they allegedly did not want you to find out. According to sources with knowledge of internal OTF dynamics in the months following Vaughn's death, there was allegedly a period of significant tension within the group that has never been publicly addressed. A period during which certain questions about the night in Atlanta were being asked internally, and the answers being given were not satisfying to everyone involved. Sources describe this period as one where the grief was real, but the conversations around specific details of that night were allegedly being managed in a way that prioritized a certain narrative over a complete accounting of what actually happened. And at the center of those allegedly managed conversations, sources claim, was the question of what Vaughn said on that last call and what the person who received it did or did not do with the information. The person is allegedly still in OTF. Still present. Still part of the world that was built around Vaughn's name and Vaughn's legacy. And according to sources, the silence they have maintained has allegedly been so consistent, so unbroken, and so carefully protected that even people inside Vaughn's circle who have asked direct questions have reportedly been met with deflection sophisticated enough to end the conversation without ever technically lying. Which means the answer to what Vaughn said on that last phone call is allegedly still sitting with one person. One person who knew Vaughn well enough to be his last call. One person who has watched 5 years of tributes and documentaries and anniversary posts, and said absolutely nothing about the most important conversation they ever had. And sources claim that person is about to have a much harder time staying quiet than they have had at any point since November 2020. Because staying quiet, according to sources close to the situation, has allegedly become significantly more complicated in recent months due to a development that insiders describe as the emergence of new information from a direction that the person in question allegedly did not anticipate and reportedly did not prepare for. The details of this development are something that sources have been willing to discuss only in general terms, citing the sensitivity of the situation and the very real possibility that public disclosure could accelerate legal and personal consequences that are allegedly already in motion. But what sources are willing to say is this: the circle of people who allegedly know the identity of the person Vaughn called that night is no longer as small as it once was, and the expansion of that circle has not happened in a way that the person at the center of it allegedly had any control over. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because for the first 5 years after Vaughn's death, the silence around this specific detail was allegedly maintained through a combination of genuine loyalty, genuine grief, and what sources describe as an unspoken agreement among people close enough to the situation to understand that certain questions were not being asked publicly for reasons that benefited everyone involved in the silence. That is how these things work in environments where trust is currency, and speaking out of turn carries consequences that go beyond social media criticism. The silence was allegedly not just one person choosing to stay quiet. It was allegedly a shared decision, made without a formal meeting or a written agreement, by multiple people who understood that keeping this specific detail buried was in their collective interest. But here is where it gets interesting. Because collective silences, according to sources familiar with how these situations evolve over time, have a structural weakness that individual silences do not. They require every person in the agreement to hold their position indefinitely, and the longer the silence goes on, the more people are carrying it, and the more carrying it costs each of them in ways that eventually become unsustainable. Sources allege that the silence around Vaughn's last phone call has been maintained by at least 3 people with direct knowledge and potentially several more with partial knowledge, and that the strain of maintaining it has allegedly manifested differently for different people in that group over the past year. Now here is the twist that reframes everything you understood from part 1. Because sources allege that the person Vaughn actually called that night is not the only one who has been protecting this information. According to insiders, there is allegedly at least one other individual, someone who was physically present in Atlanta on November 6, 2020, who has knowledge of the call not because they were the recipient but because of what happened in the immediate aftermath of that conversation. Specifically, what the person who received the call allegedly did next, and who they allegedly contacted in the minutes between the end of that call and the beginning of the shooting. Sources describe this sequence of alleged events as a chain that, if it were ever fully documented and publicly presented, would force a complete re-examination of the narrative that has existed around that night since the moment it ended. Stay right here because it gets worse. According to sources with alleged knowledge of this sequence, the person who received Vaughn's call did not simply listen and respond. They allegedly made at least one additional contact of their own in the window between Vaughn's call ending and the shooting beginning. Sources are careful to frame this as alleged and unconfirmed, noting that the nature of what that additional contact involved is something they are not yet prepared to state directly. But the implication of what sources are describing, when taken together with the other details in this story, is something that insiders say has been the source of profound tension inside certain parts of Vaughn's circle for years. The question it raises is one that sources describe as almost too painful to ask directly, but impossible to stop thinking about once it surfaces. If someone received Vaughn's last call and then made their own call immediately after, who were they calling and what were they saying? And this is the part that nobody is talking about, because the answer to that question allegedly points toward a person whose name, if it were attached to this story publicly, would create a level of controversy inside hip-hop that sources describe as having the potential to be more significant than almost anything that has happened in the culture since the night itself. Sources claim that attempts have allegedly been made to verify the sequence of calls through people who had access to information about phone activity connected to Vaughn's final hours, and that what those attempts allegedly uncovered is consistent with the account being described here. Consistent in terms of timing, in terms of the identities allegedly involved, and in terms of the gap between what the public has been told about that night and what sources allege actually happened in the minutes before the shooting began. Here is what they allegedly did not want you to find out. According to insiders, the reason this specific detail, the identity of the person Vaughn called and the call that allegedly followed it, has been so effectively buried for 5 years is not simply because the person involved chose to stay quiet. It is allegedly because the people around that person made a collective decision that this detail was the one thread that, if pulled, had the potential to unravel a version of the night that has served multiple people's interests since November 2020. Sources describe this as not a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, but as something more ordinary and in some ways more disturbing. a shared understanding among people who loved Vaughn and also had reasons to protect themselves that certain things were better left in the dark. But sources now allege that the darkness is getting harder to maintain. Because the person Vaughn called is allegedly dealing with something that sources describe as the accumulated weight of 5 years of carrying a conversation that meant everything and saying nothing about it publicly, while watching the world celebrate Vaughn's memory in ways that sources say this person finds increasingly difficult to witness in silence. According to insiders, there have allegedly been moments in private settings where this person has come close to saying things that would open the entire story up, moments that people present for them allegedly recognized as the edge of a breaking point that has not yet been crossed, but that sources say feels closer now than it has at any point since 2020. And somewhere in Chicago, according to sources, there are people who allegedly know that the breaking point is coming and who are reportedly trying to decide right now whether they want to be on the right side of it when it does. What sources describe as the approaching breaking point is not, according to insiders, something that is being driven primarily by external pressure. Those sources acknowledge that the growing public conversation around the details of that night has allegedly created an environment where maintaining silence is requiring more active effort than it once did. The pressure that sources describe as most significant is allegedly internal, the kind of pressure that builds inside a person over years of carrying something that fundamentally changes how they understand themselves and their relationship to the people around them. The person who received Vaughn's last call has allegedly continued to be a visible and active presence inside the world that grew up around Vaughn's memory. According to sources, they attend events where Vaughn's name is celebrated. They engage with the music, with the tributes, with the cultural infrastructure that has been built around his legacy since his death. And sources claim that each of those engagements allegedly requires them to perform a version of grief and loyalty that exists in direct tension with what they are not saying, a performance that sources describe as becoming increasingly costly in ways that are allegedly visible to people close enough to observe them carefully over time. But here is where it gets interesting. Because sources allege that in recent months, at least 2 people inside Vaughn's extended circle have allegedly begun asking questions about the events of November 6, 2020 with a specificity and directness that they were not asking before. These questions, according to insiders, are not coming from outsiders or from media. They are allegedly coming from people who were there, or who were close enough to there to have their own pieces of the picture, and who have allegedly decided that the version of that night they have been given is no longer sufficient. Sources describe this internal questioning as something that the person Vaughn called is allegedly aware of and allegedly unsettled by in a way that sources say is different from the general discomfort of maintaining a long-held silence. And this is the part that nobody is talking about. Because sources allege that one of these internal questioners has allegedly obtained, through means that sources are not prepared to detail, information that is described as partially corroborating the account of the call sequence that was laid out earlier in this story. Not fully. Not in a way that is ready to be presented publicly as documented evidence, but corroborating in the sense that sources say it confirms the general shape of what allegedly happened in those minutes before the shooting in a way that the person Vaughn called would allegedly find very difficult to explain away if it were ever brought directly to them. According to insiders, this information has allegedly been in the possession of this internal questioner for several months and has not yet been used in any formal or public way, which sources say is itself a form of pressure. The pressure of knowing that someone else knows, even if neither party has yet brought it into the open. Now here is the twist that sources say nobody inside OTF was prepared for. According to insiders, Vaughn's mother has allegedly been told about the existence of this internal questioning. Not the specific details. Not the names. But the fact of it. The fact that people inside Vaughn's own circle are allegedly no longer unanimously committed to the silence that has existed since November 2020. And sources claim that her alleged response to this information was not relief and not vindication, but something closer to a grief so deep it has no name. A grief that sources describe as the particular anguish of a mother who lost her son and is now allegedly learning that the people she trusted to honor his memory have been having private conversations about the truth of his final night that she has not been part of. Stay right here because it gets worse. Sources allege that Vaughn's mother has reportedly made clear to people close to her that she intends to pursue answers regardless of what those answers cost in terms of relationships and alliances that were built in the years since Vaughn died. According to insiders, she allegedly said, and these words are reported through sources and not directly confirmed, that her son made a phone call before he died and somebody on the other end of that call has been living their life for 5 years like that call never happened, and she is not going to let that stand indefinitely. That alleged statement, according to sources who were told about it, was received by people close to the situation as a declaration rather than a threat. The kind of thing a mother says when she has passed the point of hoping that the truth will surface on its own and has decided to become the reason it surfaces. Here is what they allegedly did not want you to find out. Because sources claim that the person who received Vaughn's call is allegedly aware that Vaughn's mother is asking questions now in a way she was not asking before. And sources describe the awareness of that fact as something that has allegedly changed the calculus for this person in ways that are not yet fully visible from the outside, but that insiders say are manifesting in behavioral shifts that people close to them have noticed. Sources describe someone who is allegedly more guarded in certain conversations than they used to be, more careful about who they spend time around, and allegedly more aware of the fact that the silence they have maintained is now being tested from a direction that is harder to deflect than a journalist or a social media comment. According to sources, there is allegedly one more layer to this story that has not yet been discussed publicly and that sources are not yet prepared to fully detail, but that insiders describe as the piece that allegedly connects Vaughn's last phone call not just to the events of that night, but to a set of decisions that were made in the days before November 6, 2020. Decisions about where Vaughn would be, who he would be with, and why Atlanta specifically became the location where everything ended. Sources allege that this layer, if it were ever brought fully into the open, would not just change the conversation about Vaughn's death, but would allegedly change the conversation about the months leading up to it in ways that sources describe as potentially the most significant unanswered question in the entire 5-year history of this story. The person who received that last call allegedly knows this layer exists. They allegedly knew it existed when the phone rang. And sources claim that whatever Vaughn said in those final minutes before the shooting, the weight of it has been sitting with this person every single day since the night they answered. Some people carry silence because they have to. Some people carry it because they choose to. And sources allege that the person inside OTF who received King Vaughn's last call has been carrying both kinds at the same time, for 5 years, in a world that celebrates the man he called every single day without knowing what was said. This story is not finished. If anything, according to sources close to the situation, what you have just heard represents the outline of something that is still actively developing in real time, in private conversations, in allegedly shifting loyalties inside a circle that built itself around a man whose voice was silenced before he turned 27. There are questions at the center of everything laid out in this video that do not have public answers yet, and those questions are the ones that matter most going forward. If Vaughn's mother is genuinely pursuing answers with the determination that sources describe, what happens to the relationships inside OTF when those answers start to surface? If the person who received that last call is indeed approaching a breaking point, what does the moment of breaking actually look like, and who else gets pulled into the open when it happens? And if the layer that sources describe, the decisions made in the days before November 6, 2020, is ever fully brought into the light, who inside Vaughn's world is prepared for what that revelation actually means? These are not rhetorical questions. These are allegedly active questions being asked right now by people who were close enough to Vaughn to have a stake in the answers. You need to hit that like button on this specific video because this story is not about views and it is not about algorithm performance. It is about a man who made a phone call in the last minutes of his life and chose one specific person to say whatever he needed to say. And that person has been silent for 5 years while the rest of the world has been loud about everything except the one conversation that matters most. Every like this video gets signals that people are paying attention, and that signal allegedly reaches people who are watching to see how much the public actually cares before they decide whether speaking up is worth what it will cost them. Stay subscribed. Because when this breaks, and sources allege that it is closer to breaking than it has ever been, this channel will have the full story before it reaches anywhere else. Now here is the question for the comments, and there is no clean answer to this, so think carefully. If you were the person who received Vaughn's last call, and what he said to you was something that complicated everything, would you speak up after 5 years of silence, or would you take it to your grave to protect yourself and the people around you? Let the comments decide. Because that question has been tearing people apart inside certain circles for 5 years already. Some calls change everything the moment they connect. And some people spend the rest of their lives deciding whether to answer for them.